One of the greatest reveals of the War Within is that there is a highly developed empire across the Storming Sea that we know next to nothing about. But I think that through written storytelling elements and visual world building, we can piece together and infer much more than we realize about this new Arathi empire. This will not be an exhaustive listing of everything we know about the Arathi and Hallowfall, instead focusing on details that I think tell us more about what we can expect to see in future content, but based more in analysis than just speculation. As a spoiler warning, I am including information and background footage up through the end of the max level campaign. If you haven't finished that yet, spoilers ahead. I will also be assuming that you are familiar with the story of King Thoradin and the Troll Wars, but let's cover the basics of Hallowfall first. Starting out in Hallowfall, the expedition's background is revealed to us piece by piece alongside the campaign of the War Within, told to us through the adventures of Anduin and Faerun. We quickly learn that the Arathi are all half-elves who revere the sacred flame, a facet of elemental holy and arcane fire that manifests through their faith. They journeyed from an unknown land beyond the bounds of our maps and arrived in Hallowfall in pursuit of a vision from their emperor, of a falling star and a coming apocalypse. That being Mereldar, the giant crystal embedded in the ceiling of the cavern, which would lead them to fight in Renalash, their final war between light and dark. They have been here for around 15 years and have developed a culture of mutual support in the face of dark forces that assail them. They have skirmished with the Nerubians of Azj-Kahet since they first arrived, but recently, around the time that Sargeras stabbed his blade into the planet, Mereldar shifted to Shadow in an event that the Arathi call the Day of Darkness, and new enemies came in greater numbers. A vicious tribe of Ankoan called the Kobus rose from the depths of the Undersea and began to harass, kidnap, and kill any Arathi they could find near the waters. And some of their own began to work for the Shadow as well, forming the Order of Night, who want to bring about Renalash rather than fight against it. As for how the Arathi arrived in Hallowfall, we have two accounts of events that may or may not be conflicting. We are told fairly directly that the Arathi ships teleported underground, and many were wrecked on the rocks in the cavern. Faerun the Stowaway saved the sacred flame. But we are also told through two sources, shown on screen, that the Arathi Armada arrived over the Isle of Dorn and remained in the air for some time. Presumably, some of the Arathi went below and made contact with Mereldar, which initiated the teleportation of the Arathi airships. It's entirely possible that it was not Mereldar that teleported them after all, but these discrepancies read of a plot point to be addressed in a future patch. Now with that out of the way, we can start to talk more about this distant Arathi empire that the Hallowfall expedition came from, their possible origins, culture, and the land itself. But one quick side note first. I want to explain a creative writing concept called script economy. The idea is that everything within a story must serve some purpose, whether it's to advance the plot, to communicate an idea to the audience, or to show some portion of world building. What the element is does not matter as much as what it does. You may have heard the phrase Chekhov's gun. If a gun is shown in Act 1, you can expect it to be fired by Act 3. If the gun wasn't going to be fired, it shouldn't have been mentioned in the first place. The idea is that you keep your audience focused on your story and not chasing red herrings. You'll find that nearly all modern media follows this rule, because capitalism. Events happen, characters are featured, all serving some purpose. I bring this up in relation to the Arathi because there is a character with literally 2 paragraphs of story prior to the War Within who seems to be given an elevated role in the Arathi mythos. And that is Mereldar, sister to General Lordain, and the first to bring light magic to humanity. And that's it, really. She got a short blurb in Chronicles about how she had a vision of 5 radiant figures and developed light magic when she brought their teachings into the waking world. It's assumed that the 5 figures, who are probably Naru, correspond to the 5 Librams of the Silver Hand, but we have no confirmation. Until Hallowfall, her most recent reference chronologically is a lake in the southern eastern Plaguelands named after her. At first glance, referencing her would seem relatively benign, more of a nod to Chronicles than anything, but let's break down how she is referenced. The first and most obvious reference is that the Arathi of Hallowfall have named their local capital after her, but we are also told in their Book of Idioms that they took some phrases from her letters, and some clickable interaction dialogue with various NPCs will refer to Mereldar's testament like a religious text. This is combined with the knowledge that the distant Arathi Empire was founded by a group of light-revering humans and high elves who left Lordaeron at some point after the Troll Wars, indicated by the references to King Thoradin. That is the limit of our solid knowledge. We don't even know for sure if they brought the sacred flame with them or if they found it on the land they traveled to. So in the absence of further information, we can either start to speculate blindly or refer to that rule of script economy that I mentioned. Quite simply, given the context of how Mereldar is named and referenced, we can assume that she is foundationally important to the Empire, whether directly by leading the original group of humans and high elves or indirectly through her teachings. If she wasn't immediately relevant, then another character's name would have been used instead. But when you're developing a new fictional culture, it just makes sense to fill in the story of an already named character. Plus, the tropes write themselves, a prophetic visionary leading their people to another land, possibly even with some branch of Thoradin's family, if not a child of Thoradin and Mereldar themselves, to establish a hereditary line. It's not crazy to suggest that they sailed from Lordaeron all the way across the Storming Sea. That is similar to how Kulturas was established around the same time period, who they do share some architectural similarities with. But I'm not discounting the possibility that they were teleported or otherwise transported by another party to this other continent through more expedient means. There they discovered, or brought with them, the Sacred Flame and established their empire, and then decided that humans and High Elves would become one people. Which presents some interesting questions. Did the High Elves kick their mana addiction, or did they sate it with the Sacred Flame? Were they still immortal without the Sunwell? Is the Sunwell the source of the Sacred Flame? Will we learn more about this during Midnight, when we rally the scattered Elven tribes and make our stand with the forces of the light, or maybe even before that? How long do elves live naturally, and how long would it take to replace two distinct genetic populations with an entirely mixed one? I'm not a biologist, but I think that even after a few thousand years of only social forces, you would at least have some pure elves, probably pure humans too. Again, biology isn't my specialty, but this sounds like something they could bring on Ed Greenwood to consult regarding the logistics. Anyway, on to the next most prominent feature of the Arathi Empire, the Emperor himself. The sparse details we are given about him are why I am willing to make such strong assumptions about Mereldar's role in the founding of the Empire. The Arathi Emperor is stated to receive prophetic visions through the Sacred Flame, and interprets these visions to guide the Arathi to fulfill or forestall events of prophecy. We are told that this is something that has been done since the Empire's inception, but we can rule out the possibility of an immortal Emperor, as we currently have two sources referring to the Emperor by name. One refers to an Emperor Lanes IV, and one more recently as Thoradin IX. We can't say for sure if the position of Emperor is a more political or theological one, but we can say for certain that conferring trust to interpret visions is something that can and has been given to multiple people. It stands to reason then that whoever first led the Arathi to this new continent was the first one to possess this knowledge and ability on how to see visions and interpret them as prophecy. Oh, and what's that? Mereldar is already known for having visions and interpreting them. Despite this apparently being a core feature of their culture, we currently only know about two visions that their emperors have had, that of Beledar and Renalash, the Arathi's final war between light and dark. We don't have too many details right now about what Renalash would entail, but we can assume that it will probably align with the events of Midnight. And besides vague references to light and dark, we do get one lore book called the Song of Renalash that has a few stanzas that could be describing current or future events of the War Within. And given the pacing and structure of the words, I have a feeling that they are meant to be the lyrics to the musical theme that plays in various areas around Hallowfall, but particularly at the Aegis Wall where this book can be found. I have not been able to match the words to the cadence of the music, so it's just a theory for now, but give it a listen and tell me if I'm crazy or if you think you can figure it out. To be honest though, I think that this book deserves the same attention that Il'gynoth's dialogue got during Legion and Battle for Azeroth. There's a lot of meta notes surrounding Renalash, like light and dark never being capitalized anytime they are referenced in regards to Renalash, and also that this book holds chapter 11 of the song, and we're currently in 11.0. It shows stanzas 15 to 19. Does this mean it is describing the events we will see at the end of the War Within? The potential of Renalash ties into some theories I have about the Sacred Flame, which is a deep enough topic that I want to make a separate video for it. There is some overlap, but this video is meant to focus on more grounded world building. The important thing culturally is that Renalash is a prime candidate for the Arathi Emperor's prophecy manipulation, which is where we end up with what seems to be another inconsistency but might tell us more about the arrogance intrinsic to the Empire's culture. One of the Hallowfall expedition's stated goals is to fight in Renalash, but we have dialogue from a few NPCs we save inside the Nightfall Sanctum Delve that say the Order of Night was attempting to recruit them by convincing them that Renalash is inevitable. Which gives a neat little bit of propaganda where their apocalyptic end time is presented as just another prophecy that could be fulfilled or forestalled if the Arathi just follow their Emperor's guidance. But speaking of culture, there's a lot we know about the landmass, technology, and military of the Arathi Empire from some notes and details that we get in Hallowfall. But what do we call their landmass? There's no way that I'm going to let a lack of information stop me now. After all, is there really a lack of information? We know about Avaloran. The writers at Blizzard know that we know about Avaloran, and they didn't introduce it for no reason, script economy. If it was important that we not presume the Arathi Empire is on Avaloran, they could have given a single line of throwaway dialogue referring to Avaloran as an other compared to the land that they are on, but to be fair, this could be what the reference to Titan's Isle is. But until we hear of another name for their landmass or Avaloran being used on its own, I am confident in referring to their continent as just Avaloran. After all, just look at the words. The myths of Avalon are closely tied to the legends of King Arthur. Avaloran, Avalon. Arathor, Arthur. There is still a distinct possibility that I'm wrong, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to continue calling their landmass Avaloran. Along those same lines, there are a couple other previous story details that we were already fairly confident would be linked to Avaloran, which still make a lot of sense when fitting them in alongside the Arathi Empire. First of all is the Titan Heretics. These guys were for sure on Avaloran, but we've seen that the Titans do not shy away from calling different groups enemies of the Titans, so referring to something as a heretic is a little unusual. With some of the details we've been given about the Earthen of Khaz Algar, it's very easy to imagine how and why someone could become a heretic to the Titans. Whoever they are, they have been inhabiting Avaloran since the days of Odin as the Prime Designate, which means that they have lived there for well beyond the 25,000 year mark that encompasses most of our recorded history, which is enough time for them to have basically become the natives of Avaloran. And it does look like the native population will have a firm role in the story of the Empire, even if it isn't the heretics of Avaloran, because of one detail in the expedition's history that I feel is never addressed with the weight that it deserves. Whenever you ask an Arathi character what they remember of home, they talk positively about how peaceful they remember it being. The gardens, the libraries, the parades, the happiness. And yet, while hosting a dinner in her home, General Steelstrike tells us that she earned her post as general of the Hallowfall expedition by putting down an uprising in one of the Empire's territories. Something doesn't add up. How are things so bad that there are uprisings, yet so good that nobody in Hallowfall remembers the Empire negatively? Of course there's going to be some level of nostalgia from people who haven't seen home for over a decade, but it seems like Blizzard is establishing the greater Arathi Empire as extremely imperialistic, reminiscent of some empires in the real world. The members of the expedition likely came from territories closer to the imperial capital with better quality of life, while the outer territories are likely more harshly governed, and potentially populated by more than just Arathi half-elves. And looking at some more lore hinted to us in Dragonflight, we also have strong reason to believe that Aranethria's brood resides on Avaloran, or at least within flying distance of the Empire. We hear that the Arathi impression of dragons is that of legendary beasts who scour the land and grant wishes, but most importantly, they have a distinct knowledge and experience with dragons to the point that Faerun, who spent most of her life away from the Empire, recognizes Drakthir as draconic on sight. Whatever brood Aranethria established when she traveled beyond the Storming Sea is likely a few steps away from any other dragons we know, but they are almost certainly there alongside the Arathi. The ability to grant wishes speaks of an entirely new type of magic, but it's unlikely we'll learn any more about this until after the World Soul Saga, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I don't know if I'm ready for another batch of dragon lore quite yet, so I'm content to leave this to simmer for a while longer. And lastly, if there was any potential candidate for the Night Squall's pillaging, it is almost certainly the Arathi Empire. There could be other landmasses and other large nations waiting to be discovered, but what little we have seen of the Empire through the Hallowfall expedition suggests lands that would be ripe for plunder from an intrepid pirate. But all of that is just fitting known information alongside new details. What else can we glean just from what we've seen in Hallowfall? Let's start with something that I thought was speculative but was later proven through world building. The Arathi brought lynxes with them from the old world. I was kinda thinking how they are a parallel to horses and house cats. These bear-sized apex predators are likely to escape and wreak havoc on local ecosystems. And, lo and behold, the area around Dunel's Kindness is full of escaped lynxes who each have their own Shalehorn corpse. I almost don't want to imagine what has happened with escaped lynxes on Avaloran proper. And again, regarding the potential bounty of Avaloran, we have various pieces of one-off dialogue hinting at the size of the landmass. We hear that Arathi Steel conquered a continent, and that their histories include an entire island being annexed in a single event, significant enough to create a cultural idiom. They are capable of mass-producing spyglasses, and probably other goods, and there is some manner of creature that the Arathi hunt for ivory to use in ornamental pieces on their tinderboxes. Their landmass is also large enough, or possessing terrain dangerous enough to necessitate developing airships for war, an advancement over the pike and shield formations the Arathi used when they first arrived. And not just airships, but entire fleets of them. The Hallowfall expedition was made only from the 3rd Fleet of the Arathi Navy. In some ways, their culture hasn't drifted that far from how we see various human kingdoms of Lordaeron today. Spiritual, but highly militaristic. They even have their own traditions of magic with a deep observance of the world around them. Being a completely dominant force on their continent means that they have plenty of time for academic and artistic pursuits. And in their architecture, we can see their roots as one of the groups that sailed from Gilneas after the Troll Wars. Their building style is nearly identical to that of Kulturas and Gilneas, and they also use the same water wheels and crane pulleys in their construction projects, lending credence to when and exactly where they left the old world. Sure, it's because most other races use magic instead, but those are the only other 2 locations we really see practical technology utilized like this. And I do think it's worth noting that Dawn Towers and Lamplighters are Hallowfall originals. The expedition first warded off the shadows with lamps containing the sacred flame, but eventually upgraded to the Dawn Towers, and General Steelstrike has a decorative banner commemorating the founding of the Lamplighters. So I wouldn't expect cities on Avalorn to look exactly the same, but with some similar concepts. And while a lot of what I have noted is based on filling in the blanks with pre-existing detail, we get an interesting kernel of information from the book about the Arathi perception of the cosmos. This is where I think people may read too much into the text itself, so much like with Avalorn and Mereldar, we turn to concepts of creative writing strategy to identify the context of what we are reading. That is, this book is not Word of God. It is exactly what it tells us it is, the Arathi's view of the cosmos. It is an opinion piece written from an in-universe perspective. We see NPC dialogue that tells us that they have determined through mathematical proofs that despite their appearance, the cosmic powers we know are less monolithic than they appear. At a glance, the Codex of dimensional structures can be a bit painful to read, but the main takeaway can be narrowed to a far more tangible point. The Arathi's view of the cosmos has found that singular energy types are inherently unstable. For example, pure fire magic is unstable, but fire and earth combined to create a fireball is much more stable. The book also puts forth the idea that void and fel as we understand them are representations of the culture of old gods and demons and not the actual nature of the cosmic power itself. This is getting into some things that inspired me to cover the Sacred Flame as its own topic, but there is one major flaw in how their theories are presented. They only refer to the Firelands. We understand the elemental planes to be creations of the Titan Keepers, and also lacking any of the intrigue and uncertainty that the Emerald Dream had, which would suggest that it predated the Titans. The elementals themselves confirm this for us. Fireland, Skywall, the Abyssal Maw, and Deepholm are prisons that the elementals must escape from to return to their home. They are elementals of Azeroth, not cosmic creatures. But the Arathi are, at the very least, partially right. The Legion we fought was very much a force of fel joined with fire, and we have seen the old gods utilized void joined with both earth and water, which also conveniently gives us a clear distinction between them and the cosmic void we have been exploring since Aberrus. What the writers plan to do with this information remains to be seen, but it will probably be more important for the progression of the Arathi story more than anything. All that we have seen so far in The War Within suggests that it will be closer to Dragonflight in terms of how it addresses broader cosmic themes. But on a lighter note, the Arathi's dominance has meant that they have time for leisurely pursuits like Light's Gambit, which may or may not have some inspiration from actual historical events of the Empire, like the Batkin that are mentioned. The idea is intriguing regardless of whether this is something that the Arathi made up or if it's an actual kind of creature on Avalorn. But what do I expect from the future of their story? Well, we still have a lot of possible threads to learn about their backstory before we move into Midnight. There is Daneth Trollbane, or perhaps Merrill Fellstorm, who would have been around to potentially have met Mereldar or to know the original founders of the Empire. And then there's Belladar. It looks like it slammed into the ceiling of the cavern, but not really. Especially when we start looking at concept art, it looks more like Belladar has created a trans-dimensional impact point similar to the one above Icecrown after the Helm of Domination was broken, but this time something is stuck between the two realms. We've learned more about the nature of Belladar through the most recent Titan Disc quest, but this doesn't explain the veins of magic that reach through the ceiling around the crystal. On a larger scale, I've seen many people jump to saying that the Arathi remind them of the Imperium of Man from Warhammer 40,000, and to that I say, be original. Games Workshop doesn't own the word Emperor. Just because there's plate-armored religious zealots doesn't mean that they are meant to be Space Marine analogies. Especially when there's another comparison to be made, one that I think is much more compelling. The Arathi's head of state is a religious figure called Thoradin. Their architecture features several towering spires, and they easily build grand structures on top of narrow geographical features. They probably have, or will have, a dragon problem. That's right, I'm getting on the hype train for World of Warcraft 14.0, Heavensward. Jokes aside, if you think I missed something, let me know. If this video was informative or at least fun to listen to, please hit the like button and drop a comment to show the algorithm some engagement. Take it easy, have a good week, and I'll see you in the next video.